British businessman disrespects Mandela black waiters. Response shocks entire restaurant. A posh London restaurant. A powerful British businessman. And Nelson Mandela, the Nelson Mandela quietly seated for lunch. But when this businessman hurled words of disrespect at Mandela, no one expected what happened next. A black waiter stepped forward. And what he did made headlines across the UK. Stay with us till the end, because this isn't just a story, it's a moment the world needed to see. And hey, before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Your support keeps these powerful stories alive. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the heart of London, where high society often gathered behind the velvet curtains of the Kingsworth Club, an elite, reservation-only restaurant overlooking the River Thames. Waiters in starched shirts moved swiftly across polished marble floors, and the aroma of truffle oil and aged wine hung in the air like a signature perfume. But on this particular day, the staff was buzzing more than usual. A mysterious VIP guest had booked the private corner booth. A man whose name was withheld for security reasons. Only the head manager, Olivia, knew the full details, and her hands were trembling just a little as she checked the arrangements for the third time. Silverware polished, wine list in French and English, curtains drawn just right. She asked, without waiting for answers. At the far end of the room, a table for one had already been prepared with hand-folded napkins and a small arrangement of proteas, the national flower of South Africa. That was the only clue, but no one truly believed it. Until he walked in, the door opened quietly. A hush fell over the restaurant. And then, there he was, Nelson Mandela. Yes, that Nelson Mandela, wearing a simple gray suit and an even simpler smile. He walked in with the dignity of a king and the humility of a teacher. No bodyguards in sight, just him, and a quiet presence that turned every head. A few diners recognized him instantly, their jaws dropping in awe. Others needed a second glance, but when they realized who he was, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Mandela nodded graciously as Olivia led him to his seat, her voice almost shaking. "We're honored, sir." Mandela just smiled and said, "It's the people who serve who make a place honorable." Meanwhile, not far away at table 5, a man watched with a twisted grin. He was tall, white, wearing an expensive navy suit and a gold Rolex that caught the chandelier light like a mirror. His name was Reginald Thornburn, a powerful British businessman known for real estate, ruthless boardroom tactics, and his not-so-subtle opinions on colonial glory. He looked Mandela up and down and let out a quiet scoff. "Well, the prisoner becomes the guest," he muttered, loud enough for his lunch companion to hear and for others nearby to feel uncomfortable. His friend chuckled nervously. "You should be careful, Reg, that's Nelson Mandela." Reginald leaned back, sipping his wine. "Exactly, a man who should have been grateful we gave him railroads and roads instead of rebellion. But what did he do? He rebelled. Ungrateful lot, aren't they?" At that moment, one of the young waiters, a black man named Daniel, was passing nearby. His jaw tightened. He'd heard whispers like that before, but this was Mandela, the man who spent 27 years behind bars for justice. The man who forgave those who imprisoned him, and now he was being disrespected. In a public restaurant, Daniel glanced at Mandela's table. Mandela was reading the menu calmly, unbothered or maybe too experienced to let such noise reach his spirit. But Daniel, he was young. He had grown up in Brixton, raised on stories of apartheid and hope. He wasn't going to let this moment pass. As he refilled the glasses at Reginald's table, Daniel's hands shook just slightly. "You all right, boy?" Reginald asked, with a smirk. "You look nervous." Daniel didn't respond. Not yet. He had something bigger in mind. A storm was brewing in that elegant restaurant, and no one, not even Nelson Mandela, knew what was about to unfold next. The lunch crowd was thinning, and soft jazz played in the background as sunlight streamed through the tall windows. The Kingsworth Club returned to its usual rhythm, waiters moving, glasses clinking, cutlery gently tapping porcelain. But at table 5, a different kind of rhythm had started, one of arrogance, prejudice, and disdain. Reginald Thornburn, now emboldened by his second glass of Bordeaux, leaned further into his rant. His companion, a slightly younger man from the finance sector, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I don't get the fuss," Reginald said, almost laughing. "Mandela St. Nelson. They call him. He's just a man, like any of us. But here, he's treated like royalty." His friend tried to interject. "Well, he is a Nobel Peace Prize winner." Reginald waved him off. "Please, Peace Prize, you know who wins those? People who make others feel good about guilt. Mandela was a symbol, nothing more. And let's not pretend South Africa was some paradise before he got there. We built that country, and then he turned it upside down." A gasp came from the table next to them. A middle-aged black woman and her teenage daughter were seated close enough to hear every word. The mother gave Reginald a cold stare. Her daughter, who had been quietly admiring Mandela from afar, now looked horrified. Daniel, the waiter, had seen the moment too. From across the room, he noticed the tension rising. and Mandela still peacefully flipping through the wine list as if he were in a library. Not sitting feet away from open disrespect, Daniel walked back into the staff corridor and leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. "Everything okay?" asked Julia, one of the other waitresses. "No. Not okay," Daniel replied. "That man at table 5, he's saying awful things about Mandela, loud enough for others to hear." Julia blinked. "Mandela's not reacting, though maybe he doesn't mind." "He minds," Daniel said softly. "But some men are too dignified to show it." Back in the dining room, Reginald's voice grew louder. "I mean, look at this place," he said. "It was designed to keep the rabble out. Now we have political prisoners being treated like emperors, while decent men like us have to sit back and smile." His friend gave an awkward laugh. "Reg, you should lower your voice." But Reginald wasn't interested in lowering anything. "Did you know I once met Thatcher?" he said. "She told me Mandela was a menace, and she was right. These bleeding hearts forget what it was like. Order, control, discipline. Now it's just chaos. No wonder London's overrun." By now, the room was nearly silent. People were pretending to look at their menus or phones, but most eyes were watching Reginald and Mandela. Still, Mandela said nothing. He sat with his hands folded on the table, eyes soft, as though deep in thought or prayer. But Daniel had had enough. He walked calmly back into the dining room, his steps slow and deliberate. Every movement felt heavy. The kind of walk you take when you know you're about to say something that can't be undone. "Excuse me," he said, approaching Reginald's table. Reginald turned, grinning. "Ah, our glass filler returns. You bring me something stronger than this wine." Daniel didn't flinch. "I brought you something more valuable, an opportunity." Reginald raised an eyebrow. "An opportunity? Are you trying to upsell me?" "No," Daniel replied, voice steady. "I'm offering you a chance. A chance to stop embarrassing yourself in front of greatness." Silence. Every table froze. Even Mandela slowly turned his head. Curious now, Reginald blinked. "Excuse me. You've said enough," Daniel continued, voice still calm but carrying. "Wait, you've insulted a man whose shoes you're not worthy to polish. A man who was locked up for 27 years for fighting injustice, and who walked out of prison without bitterness. He could have chosen revenge. Instead, he chose peace. While you sitting here in freedom choose ignorance." A ripple moved through the restaurant. Reginald's face turned red. "Who do you think you're talking to?" "I know exactly who I'm talking to," Daniel said. "A man who's built towers but never built respect, who measures power in money but forgets its character that makes a man." Mandela was now watching, his expression unreadable. "Sir," Daniel said, turning to Mandela with a slight bow. "On behalf of everyone here, please forgive the noise." Mandela smiled. "Young man, I've heard worse in prison." Laughter broke out at a few tables. Even the staff behind the bar grinned. But Reginald stood up, furious. "This is unacceptable. I'll have your job." "You." Before he could finish, another voice cut in. "Olivia, the manager." "No, Mr. Thorne, you'll be the one leaving." He turned. "What? You've made our staff uncomfortable. You've disrupted our guests. And you've insulted a living legend. This restaurant will not serve hate, no matter how rich it comes dressed." More applause broke out, soft at first, then growing louder. Reginald, humiliated, looked around and realized cameras were pointed at him. Guests were recording. Whispers spread. He stormed out, muttering under his breath, nearly knocking over a chair. The restaurant exhaled. Mandela beckoned Daniel over. "What's your name, son?" "Daniel." "Sir." Mandela smiled again. "Daniel, a name of strength. Thank you for standing, when silence would have been easier." Daniel lowered his eyes. "You've stood for the world, sir. The least I could do was stand for you." Mandela nodded slowly. "Then sit with me. Let's share a meal." Daniel froze. "Sir, you've earned a seat at my table." And just like that, history bent once more, not in a courtroom or at a rally, but in a restaurant, where dignity met disrespect, and dignity won. Daniel sat across from Nelson Mandela, heart pounding like a drum. It was surreal. Him, a restaurant server from Brixton, now seated at the same table as the man who had changed a continent. All eyes in the restaurant were still on them, but Mandela was as composed as ever, taking a sip of water and studying Daniel with warm curiosity. "You handled that very well," Mandela said softly, as though they were old friends. "You reminded that man of something he had forgotten." Daniel looked unsure. "I wasn't sure I should have spoken. I mean, I'm just a waiter." Mandela leaned forward slightly. "There is no such thing as just a waiter. You are a man, and in that moment, you carried the weight of 1,000 ancestors. Never underestimate the power of truth spoken calmly." Daniel nodded, but his thoughts swirled. He had grown up hearing stories about Mandela from his grandmother, a South African immigrant who had fled apartheid during the 70s. She had described Mandela as a light in a very dark tunnel. Daniel's family never had much, but they had pride, and Mandela's story had always been a reason for it. "I didn't speak for myself," Daniel said, voice shaking. I spoke for my grandma, for my father who never made it out of the system, for the kids back home who think being silent is safer. Mandela studied him quietly. Your voice may tremble, but it carries thunder, and thunder brings rain. Rain brings change. Olivia, the manager, approached nervously. Mr. Mandela, Daniel, would you like some dessert? On the house of course. Mandela chuckled. Thank you. Perhaps something sweet to remind us life can be gentle too. As dessert arrived, whispers filled the restaurant. Guests who had watched the encounter were now telling others. Phones buzzed. Social media, notifications pinged. The video of Daniel confronting Reginald was already making the rounds, shared, liked, and reposted with hashtags like #WaiterWithCourage and #MandelaMoment. In one corner, a teenage girl whispered to her mother, that waiter's a hero. But Daniel didn't feel like one. Not yet. He was still absorbing everything: Mandela's presence, the praise, the applause. What had started as a normal shift had turned into something he never imagined. Back at table 5, now empty and cleared, one of the bussers picked up a napkin Reginald had scribbled on. It read, "These people never know their place." The busser crumpled it and threw it away. In stark contrast, Mandela slid a small notebook from his pocket and jotted down a few words before looking up. "Daniel," he asked, "what would you do if the world gave you a platform?" Daniel paused. "Honestly, I'd use it to tell the truth. About where we come from. About what we carry. About how we survive." Mandela smiled again. "Good, because sometimes, a man doesn't ask for the spotlight, but when it finds him, he must shine for others too." Within an hour, the video had reached Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. One version had over 500,000 views before the lunch crowd had even finished dessert. The footage was simple. A black waiter standing up to a racist businessman. Mandela sitting silently in the background like a wise elder. The climax, Olivia's calm but firm command, "You'll be the one leaving." The clip was only 2 minutes long, but it hit like lightning. By evening, headlines began to roll in. Young waiter defends Mandela in London eatery. Internet applauds. British mogul humiliated. After racist rant caught on camera, Nelson Mandela and the waiter who reminded us what courage looks like. Daniel's phone didn't stop buzzing. Friends, co-workers, and even strangers sent him screenshots, tagging him, praising him. But not everyone was celebrating. Reginald Thornburn, the disgraced businessman, tried to contain the damage. He released a half-hearted statement, claiming he was taken out of context and deeply respects Nelson Mandela's legacy. But by then, investigative journalists had already dug up more skeletons from his past. Housing discrimination lawsuits, questionable overseas contracts, and racist remarks buried in old interviews. He tried deleting his social media accounts. Too late. The internet had already judged and sentenced. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Mandela invited Daniel for a private walk by the Thames after the meal. The two men strolled quietly under the sunset sky. The city's hum felt distant, as if time had slowed to honor the moment. "You know," Mandela said, "when I was in prison, I used to dream of moments like this. Peaceful, simple, a walk, a conversation. No chains, no bars." Daniel looked at him, tears forming. "I can't believe you're so gentle. After everything." Mandela turned to him. "Gentleness is not weakness. It is knowing the power to crush and choosing not to." They walked on. "I saw something in your eyes today, Daniel," Mandela continued. "It wasn't just anger, it was purpose. You reminded me of younger versions of myself, and of so many who stood beside me." Daniel hesitated. "My father was always angry. He used to say, 'The world doesn't change unless someone throws a punch.'" Mandela nodded. "And sometimes, someone does. But today, you threw words. Words can cut deeper than fists when spoken with truth." As they parted ways, Mandela said, "Keep speaking, Daniel. The world is listening." The next day, Daniel's life changed forever. He woke up to thousands of new followers on every platform. His inbox was filled with interview requests from BBC, CNN, even Oprah's team. A local paper called him London's new voice of conscience. Brands offered him sponsorship deals. But Daniel didn't care about fame. He was still working his shift, showing up, tying his apron, and keeping things real. That morning, Olivia approached him, holding a letter. "It came for you," she said. "Handle it." Daniel opened it. "Dear Daniel, you reminded us that courage doesn't come in uniforms or titles. It walks quietly in aprons and broken shoes. You have a voice. Use it. We'd like to sponsor your education and support any community project you believe in. Warm regards, the Nelson Mandela Foundation." Daniel was speechless. His knees went weak. Julia, the waitress, caught him. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think this is just the beginning." Weeks later, Daniel was speaking at youth centers, launching an anti-discrimination campaign and working with students to document stories of overlooked heroes. The restaurant held a Justice Dinner fundraiser with Mandela as guest of honor, and the money raised built a literacy center in Brixton, named after Daniel's grandmother. The final twist. One afternoon, a guest walked into the restaurant asking for Daniel. He was an older white man in a tweed coat. I used to know Reginald Thornburn, the man said. I never stood up to him when I should have, but you did. I came here to shake your hand and say thank you. Daniel looked at the man and offered a seat. It's never too late to stand. The restaurant, now famous for what happened that day, had a plaque near the door. Here, courage stood up, hate walked out, and dignity dined in peace. Sometimes, history doesn't happen on battlefields or in courtrooms. Sometimes, it happens at table 5. One man's disrespect revealed another man's honor, and a young waiter reminded the world, even the quietest voice can shake the room. If you were moved by Daniel's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your voice, too, can make history.